Hey folks, I'm Fillerby and welcome to my TLDR on the new Galactic Paragons DLC for Stellaris. In this little guide, we're going to talk about the free 3.8 patch Gemini that was released alongside the DLC and all the stuff that's included in that for you, as well as the stuff that's included in the DLC, so you can determine whether you want to buy the DLC or just stick with the patch, and I'll give my thoughts at the end. But first, let's start what's going on in the DLC. The very first thing is a new ruler designer. So when you start a new game and you create a new empire, there's a new ruler trait and ruler appearance down here where you can select your ruler's color variant and clothing just like before, and it sticks this time. Give them titles and stuff and choose their gender if you want. And a name, but you also get to pick traits now because rulers have traits. You get to determine what kind of ruler they were when they started, as well as the traits they start the game with. You have one trait point here to pick, but there are positive and negative traits. In the game, sometimes. I don't see any negative traits here, so just positive traits in the game. You get to pick one as you go on, and you can make your ruler as you see fit. The next part of the new patch is a new council mechanic. So they've condensed some of the positions on your in your game. Specifically, the technology tree doesn't have 3 scientists anymore. It just has 1, which is your head of research. And they've included a Minister of Defense as well, and as well as your ruler in the middle here. And in the base patch game, you have these 3 council positions. And this council has Empire-Y effects. For instance, the Minister of Defense applies ship upkeep, army upkeep, and starbase upkeep negative modifiers based on their skill level as they level up. Similarly, the head of research increases research speed based on their skill level, and your ruler increases edicts funds and pop amenity usage based on their skill level, as well as people on the council apply their specific council skills to the empire as well. So they may have a trait, for instance, that allows them to do things. So my Minister of Defense here doesn't have any traits that apply to, and we'll talk about traits in a minute, that apply to the council as the empire as a whole, but my Minister of Research does, if I can find them in here. This one. No, that's not him. The Minister of Research does here we go, Head of Research. Includes a trait here called Mining Rush at level 2 in this particular case, and it provides an Empire effect of plus 7.5% minerals from jobs, which is very cool, very groovy. Each of these positions affect a small bonus to the Empire, and your council can enact agenda items. So if you click the little button in here to see agenda items, you can see the list, and this will be representative of which one is on, and each of these do something in your empire that they will work on for a while. So there's an initiation phase where they work in building it and getting it ready, and during that initial phase you get the top part there where it says initial modifier. So for this particular one, a higher purpose. Citizens will get pop happiness and spiritual ethics attraction during that build-up phase, and then once it's launched, you get a little pop-up that says agenda ready to launch. You launch it, and they will get citizen pop happiness and spiritual ethics attraction plus 40 for the duration. Now the standard duration is 10 years, and you can only have 1 agenda item active at a time. The empire, the size of your empire and the skill of your counselors will determine how long it takes for them to complete making an agenda. So the bigger your empire, the longer it will take them to make an agenda that is ready to launch. So they'll become further and further apart because it's going to extend beyond the 10 years, possibly. There are different things in the game that allow you to extend that time, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. Also want to note that Gestalt consciousnesses don't have individual people in their empire that you pick to be ministers of this or that, because it doesn't make sense for a big Gestalt hive mind, right? So what they do is they have instead a nodes of consciousness. So they have their sort of leader in the middle, and there's different nodes of consciousness that you can set up in the side. It's not as in-depth a mechanic as it is with the non-Gestalt conscious empires, but they did include something for that particular empire type or so that they don't feel totally left out, and it still makes sense to their kind of roleplay-y gameplay sort of feel of that particular kind of empire. Let's also talk about leader cap and leader ethics. So now there's a leader cap in the game. Just like your ship cap or your starbase cap here, your naval capacity or your starbase capacity, you have a leader capacity. This capacity is determined by technologies, traditions, and other things that you have going on. And this limits the amount of leader you have, and if you go beyond it, because you can, just like your starbase capacity and your naval capacity, but it will seriously affect the amount of cost that all leaders will have on your empire. And so it's really not recommended going above it if you can. This is also going to limit the amount of scientists and governors you have, because you're only going to be able to have, like in my case, 7 in this case, to deal with what's going on. In a large empire, that could be difficult. So you're going to have to pick and choose where you put your governors, and pick and choose how many scientists that you have on science ships. You just can't have 10 science ships flying around in the world doing whatever you want them to do, or have a science ship at every planet assisting research. It's just not going to happen in this particular playthrough. Also, leaders have ethics now. So if you go to your leaders, they have ethics attached to them. This leader here is spiritualist. This leader here is authoritarian. This leader here is also authoritarian. In fact, most of my leaders are authoritarians, it seems. I do have a spiritualist scientist. And this will affect their impact in your empire, especially if there's some sort of rift or one of your factions is particularly unhappy. You may have unhappy leaders. Next, leader leveling is different. So now leaders still level up to level 10. I believe that was a hard cap before. But they get new traits every 2 levels. So if you go back to the leaders here, you can see they all have traits. So they get new traits every 2 levels. So if this leader, when he hits level 4, that pop-out would stop popping out. So they're currently level 3. Once they hit level 4, they'll get an extra trait on the end here, which is wonderful. And in the baseline DLC, or the baseline patch, 3.8 patch, these traits are random. And they can be negative traits. But you can get bonuses to your empire that reduce the likelihood of negative traits in leaders, and so that it becomes a smaller chance for your whole empire based on that particular rate. I don't have the specifics on that, but that's what it says in the patch notes. And I've seen some things in the game that mention that -1 to negative traits multiplier kind of thing. There's also renowned leaders. So there are leaders who exist out in the world who are pre-generated. And they represent various aspects of the ethics that exists there. I think there are a couple per each type. It says there's 16 in total. And so they will be tied to materialism or xenophile ethics or pacifists or spiritual or whatnot. And they will seek out like-minded empires and offer their services to you. They come with unique art and background stories and traits, which I think is pretty cool. So this leader has come to me, Clawminder. He's got some fun voiceover there. Voiceover in quotes. And so there's some description here, and we can have some conversation with him, ask what he wants, see if he wants to join us. It says you grovel well. Yeah, and then we can hire them or not hire them, and there'll be an upkeep here, and this is a greater upkeep than regular leaders, which is 4. And he comes with some interesting traits. The governor class, the mine-focused on a planet will increase mining on that planet, increase slave pop output, but he's also cruel, so it lowers the stability. Very interesting, and they'll pop up from time to time. Governors also apply only to single planets now until they get leveled up. So if I go to our planet here, Olympus, this governor here is governing on Olympus. You can see governing Olympus down that trait. And it's applying these bonuses to Olympus. If this governor levels up, you might be able to get them to, I can't remember if this is the paid DLC or not, so I'm going to say it here and I'll repeat it in the paid DLC part. that you can get them to do a whole sector, where they apply the whole bonuses to a sector, but right now they just go out on individual planets. You got to pick and choose which planets you want governors on to give bonuses to. I think the assumption is that these are exceptional governors that you're out there relying on, doing certain duties, and everything else is just sort of an administrator to that planet who handles its sort of paltry duties, right? The army builder has also changed. So if you go to your space station, there's an army builder tab now, and it functions like the ship builder, where you say, I want to build some armies, and then it will build the armies out from various planets around your empire, and they will congregate. You can also set rally points for your armies so that they will go to a single spot to congregate. And you can choose whether you want them to deploy to orbit or to deploy on a planet. So go back to Olympus here. You can still build armies here like you could before, but now there's a little checkbox that says if you want to deploy to orbit or deploy to planet. Most of the time you're going to deploy to orbit because you can use them offensively, but if you're going to use them defensively, either to stave off a rebellion on your planet, or if an enemy army fleet is coming in, you may want to build army units onto your planet to act as planet defense. And that way you can just click this little box off, and they won't deploy to orbit. They'll deploy right into this Broodwatcher stack that I have here, and they'll add more army units on the bottom to defend the planet. Orbital bombardment has also changed. Ships now do more damage to pops, buildings, and districts than they did before, so it's much more devastating to bombard a planet, which I think is great, because before I didn't find it particularly all that devastating to bombard a planet. And taking planets over that had been bombarded weren't all that difficult. They tend to fix themselves up pretty quickly. I think it's going to be much more devastating to do so now. Not prohibitively devastating, but more devastating, more realistic, I would say, to what more bombarded would be like. And the number of ships scale. So before, if you had 10k ships or you had 300k ships, it didn't really make a difference. They all applied the same level of bombardment damage to the planet. Now it scales. So starting at 100, up to 100, you get 100% of the bombardment damage. And then beyond that, it starts to scale up based on the number of ships. So at 300%, for instance, you're getting 219% bombardment damage. There's a math equation behind there that you can look up on your own if you want to know the exact math behind it. But the TLDR is that more ships beyond 100 provides more bombardment damage to a planet. So they'll bombard faster. Also, bombardment damage is scales based on planet size and population. So dense planets and small planets get more bombardment damage because they're easier to hit. There's more to hit and there's less space to hide. Whereas large planets and planets that are without a lot of population will not take less damage from bombardment. Ships can also take planets on their own, so after a ship bombards a planet, it slowly whittles down the health of the defenders here, and if it kills all the defenders off, the ships will take the planet on their own without the need of your own army showing up and landing on the planet, which is pretty cool. So you can send ships around to take over maybe smaller planets, space stations, habitats, that's what I mean by space stations, habitats, smaller planets, or planets that are lightly defended, and save your armies for the battles on the really big planets that are defended or with decent defense on it. And lastly, for about bombardment and armies, is that capital buildings now provide more ground troops. The initial starting building, I think it's the reconstructed colony ship is the name of that building, doesn't provide anything as it didn't before, but the next level is 4 troops, the level beyond that is 8, and the level beyond that is 16, so that you have much more defenders now on planets. And I noticed before when I played through these games that planets were fairly easy to take over, unless the AI or an opposing player, if you play multiplayer, built a lot of infrastructure on the planet that produced more soldiers to defend the planet. Also in the game is now a sector editor. So if we go back out here, so this used to be part of the game before, but now it is back. So if we go to planets and sectors, you can see on the right here it says edit sector. So we can edit the sector we want to. We can add and remove planets. So I don't want Salu here to be part of the planets, or Geronth to be part of the planets. I can take them out and I can add them back into another sector if I wanted to. So now you can really rearrange your planets how you want, and it helps stop these sort of weird blockages that you had. Like say I had a planet here on this system that I had colonized, and it was blocked off because this is the max range of this particular sector from my home world, and I had planets over here, but these two could connect to each other. If there was a sector, I could remove these two and add them to the other sector to fill in this sort of gap and create one sector here instead of 3. Very awesome. I'm very glad they brought that back, because it's so annoying having to delete sectors and reintroduce sectors and blah 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 to get your empire looking nice, to make sectors make sense. The ship designer has changed slightly as well. They've merged the two together, if I can measure it here, into something called fleet management. So you got the fleet manager here and the ship designer in the same tab. They have different tabs, but in the same side tab here, which I think is much better, so you can flip between them much easier. And this has changed. We have the number of fleets on the side here, which makes it much easier to see how many fleets you have, how much power they have, what they are. The create new buttons right on the top. You can see who's in charge of the fleet right away and change their stances and all that, and with their home bases and so on. And then you just add ships on the right here by clicking the add ship button, and there you go. It's all fun and done. Much cleaner display, I might note. And the last thing in the free 3.8 Gemini patch is a change to science ships. So science ships used to just click this button and they would go off and do their duty, and they would do the first things here. They would explore a system and survey a system, explore a system, survey a system, explore a system, survey a system. And you get pop-ups if you want them to do anomalies or not. Now you can say, well, I want you to do all the anomalies, so just do the anomalies and don't tell me about them. Or I want you to do all the research projects, like this one right here, that you run across. And so they'll do that on their own in some sort of priority order, or they can activate archaeological sites on their own. So if you have a really high level archaeologist, you can say, well, I just want you to go around and do all the archaeology sites in my kingdom, in my empire. And so I can uncheck all of these, and then you can go around and just do archaeology sites. So you'll start with this one here, which is what my scientist here is doing at this time. And then you move over to this one, and then when you're done, you move over to this one. And then when you're done, you move over, maybe I've taken this system now, and you can move over there, and so on and so forth. So much better than having to manually deal with these scientists, and makes a good quality of life improvement. So that basically covers all the stuff that's going on with the 3.8 patch. So let's move on and talk about what's going to be in the paid DLC. So in the paid DLC, there's a bunch of new stuff added. A lot of it is story related because this is a story pack DLC. There's also some greater depth to the leaders that they've included in this patch, which I think is pretty cool. So let's talk about some of the basic stuff first. In the previous, in the base DLC, the base patch, there were a number of renowned leaders, as the one that I showed you that popped up, who will come to you and offer their services. For the paid DLC, there are 4 special legendary leaders wandering around the galaxy who exist out there, and you have to go find them. They're on another level than the renowned Paragons. There's only 4, and they're hard to find. And they come with their own unique traits, their own unique relics, and their own unique stories, and the events attached to them that create this sort of story narrative chain around them. And they represent different aspects of society. So that's war, exploration, expansion, and ancient mysteries. I'm not sure what ancient mysteries are, but I know what the other 3 are. Ancient mysteries might have to do with these dig sites. Not entirely sure. But there's 4 of them. You can find them out in the world and try and get them to join you through some sort of story chain event, I imagine. I have not found one yet, so I'm not quite sure how that works, but it sounds really cool. It's also a new origin story for leaders. We get to create your own sort of legendary leader called Under One Rule, which is what I'm playing through in this. So you start with a legendary powerful leader as your leader, and you gain access to specific ruler traits based on this story progress that the ruler gets better over time. And you build a strong state apparatus around this particular ruler that could surpass the ruler's legacy, and start with a very resilient, long-lived species. So if we go to the species tab here, you can see that we start with perfected genes, leader lifespan plus 25, minus 15% leader experience gain. Pretty cool. And the story behind that particular origin is that we had a violent and divisive past in our world, a lot of fighting and factions, and some sort of eugenics war happened, and so on and so forth. And a leader arose amongst all of this chaos, long history of chaos, to finally unite the whole world under one person through their own might of will and charisma and sort of skill. And then this is the story of them moving out into the universe with this sort of fragile unity in this world, and can they make it work? A cool story, I think. So there's a whole origin that's part of that DLC. There's also new traditions, which I have unlocked here. So I've unlocked the aptitude tradition, which I've gone through, which has to do with making individual leaders much stronger. So it lowers their upkeep, and after you complete it, their starting traits are +1. We'll talk about traits in a second. We get more capacity and pool size. We lower the amount of negative traits that can appear. The lifespan is increased. They get special bonuses based on the kind they are, whether they naval capacity, empire size, or experience gain. And they gain more experience on their own anyhow. And there's also another one called Statecraft, which has to do with empowering your council, not the individual leaders. And so this raises the edict funds cap, as well as at its finisher, giving you more leader capacity and effective counselor skill. This lowers the agenda, it increases the agenda speed, how quickly you construct them. Counselors gain more experience on both these things, whether they complete an agenda or just in general. It unlocks new agenda items that you can enact, as well as council agenda effects duration. So the baseline is 10 years, so this will increase it to 12 years after the end of an agenda. Speaking of agendas, each tradition here adds new agenda items as part of the DLC that you can do, instead of just the base agenda items that exist for just the 3.8 patch. There's also leaders can now, when they level up, pick their traits. You cannot pick your traits in the base, but you can in the DLC, and you get to pick from 3 as you level up. This leader just leveled up from 2 to 3, so I can pick a new trait. I can pick Entrepreneur. This is one of my scientists who's an excavator. He's my archaeologist. So I can pick a new Entrepreneur trait, upgrade the Entrepreneur trait. They already have level 1. I can make it level 2. It raises the amount of consumer goods they produce. I can get them Venerated, so they produce their own unity, or I can give them Capitalist, they can produce their own energy credits. Not a great mix of traits for what I'm interested in, because they're not wonderful, but maybe I'll guess the unity bonus, and that now that person has used. And there's that toast notification I was mentioning before that you can have. If you hover over it, you stop the bar, by the way, if you wanted to read it a little more and you think it disappears too fast. I also want to note that leaders have different tiers in the DLC of skill. If I go to leaders again, my head scientist, head of research, is a 2nd tier person. So they're the veteran class. So you start off with tier 1 is just sort of a regular class. At level 4, they reach the veteran class, and they can pick a specific sub class to their position. So he's a scientist, but now he's also a researcher. As a subclass at level 4, you get to pick that. You got to pick from 3. The 3 were, one had to do with exploration, where you get better survey speed. One had to do with this researcher, we get research speed, and I don't remember what the 3rd one was anymore. I think it might have been archaeological speed. I don't quite remember. But you can pick between them. So this one is a researcher, so I got research speed, which I think made sense for my head of research. And then there's a level beyond that, which is the Destiny class, and I think that's the highest level, and you can pick even more skills that are specific to those particular classes. And also the council, might be noting, is expanded here. So the base DLC only gets these 3 central positions: your ruler, your minister of defense, and your head scientist, whatever these titles are called. But in the DLC, these 2 extra slots are open at the side, and you run an agenda. For me, it's called the Expand the Council agenda, and it will open up your slots here. And then once you do that, you can go to the slots here and pick new council positions based on your ethics and your government types. And this will affect what is in here. So I can be a grand storyteller or keeper of the vaults based on my ethics and government type. And if I pick that, then it adds another council position. I can pick one of my current leaders to be that counselor. So let's say I pick my, I pick my archaeologist, for instance, to be in that position. And now they'll provide that particular bonus to that position, to your empire. And you can see it's available for admirals, governors, generals, and scientists can all occupy this role. Some positions are just scientists, some would just be governors, and so on. Depends what you have. And other than that, there's new events, there's new ship skins, there's new artwork and such in the game, which is very cool, all part of the paid DLC. And so is the DLC worth it? I would say, yeah, it's worth it. It adds a lot of story and depth to something that didn't have a lot of depth and story to begin with, namely leaders. Before, they felt sort of like nameless cards you just slot into spots as more of a mechanic than anything related to the story or the feel of the game or your empire. But now there's much more diversity in that, and I think it's very cool, especially these traits and stuff for your leaders that can happen. That is very neat, and it does so in a way that doesn't add, well, it's adding depth to the game. It doesn't add a lot of weight to the game, and what I mean by that is, as a player, you're not going to have to do a ton more crap based off of this new DLC, all this stuff for leaders. That's going to weigh down your play in the game. Oh, there's more buttons I have to click now to do this. More busy work for me as a player. It doesn't really do that. It adds a little bit of busy work, but it also simplifies some stuff that was busy work before, like having multiple scientists that you had to keep replacing all the time and adjusting their skills, and did they have the right skill for the right slot, and were they whatever, an engineer or a physicist or a society research specialist, and all that stuff. That's all gone now. And they've added other features to the game that make things easier, like the armies all rallying to one spot, being able to create army units, being able to automate your science ships as you see fit, and so on. And all these other things are great to make the weight of the game lesser on the player while adding more story and depth to the gameplay that I think really adds to the experience. So yeah, I would say this DLC is worth it, and I recommend you go and purchase it, but that's up to you. If you don't think it's worth it, then just stick with the 3.8 patch and the things I've outlined there that you can do. Let me know what you think of the DLC, and I'll see you in my playthroughs of Stellaris on this channel, and have a great day.